Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for the Nauru webinar Inside Nauru's program, together with the CEO of the program office, Edward Clark. My name is Sebastian Grube. I am the Group Director for Brand and Events at Vancis Capital, and I will be in conversation today with Edward. Before we start, Edward, would you mind introducing yourself? Just a couple of highlights, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Sebastian. It's a pleasure to be talking with you today. So I am Edward Clark, the CEO of the Nauru Economic and Climate Resilience Citizenship Program. We launched the program about a year and a half ago, so this has been my life since then. But prior to that, my background has been in banking and compliance primarily.
Amazing. And as you said, the program launched a year and a half ago. So over this year, you've been running a reduced price contribution in order to celebrate that year. We understand Vancis Capital has been working with the program as well. And everyone that I speak to in the company, from our processing team to COO to clients that have gone through the program are very happy with it. We're very happy with the program, very impressed by how it's run. So I'm really excited to kind of dig into some of those particulars in this conversation today. You've been running this for over a year. So what was the operating philosophy behind the program, the processing model, how you structured the unit? How did that all come about?
So I think the starting point to talk about the origins of the program more than anything else is looking at Nauru itself. And being one of the most climate vulnerable countries, they saw a need to raise funds to help address some of the climate challenges and economic resilience that they face. So the program itself came about because of a need to raise funds to address this. And then in terms of the design of the program, the way that we went about that, we really looked across the industry as it existed in 2024. We looked at a lot of the Caribbean programs. We looked at how Malta was run, Vanuatu, and we tried to basically pick what we thought worked well, what didn't work well, and at the center of all of this was, how do we actually protect a country's reputation when running a citizenship program, which, to those outside of the industry can sometimes appear somewhat controversial. So that was really the fundamental principle, how do we protect the reputation of a country in designing a program? Looking at some of the conversations that have been had with the Caribbean, they had to put in place these pillars, things like interviews during the application process. So we looked at all of those requirements and we tried to build it together in a way that made sense also for the scale and size of the investment. The other thing that was really important with the design of the program was making sure that there was a really sound legal foundation as well. So having that proper framework in place was actually really important for us as a program, for the country, but also for people investing, knowing that it has such a sound legal framework. There's a lot more that I can go into if you want me to, but I'm worried that it might get a little bit technical. But really the principle was around firstly, protecting the country's reputation, but also designing a program that can operate very efficiently as well, which, I'm sure we'll talk about more.
We definitely will talk about the efficient operations. I'm curious about the reputation part. Of course, it's amazing to hear that was a very important consideration at the start. How has that been going over the last year and a half? Have you been able to maintain the reputation of the country, lift it up? What were the conversations around that? Where are you now?
So overall, I think the reputation for Nauru has been maintained relatively well. We haven't seen much negative pushback, in particular in terms of close stakeholders such as the Australian government, who have a very close relationship with Nauru because of the proximity in the Pacific. I have an active engagement with the Australian Consul General in Nauru, and we haven't had a lot of criticism or pushback. Just as one example, and a lot of this is really because of the way the program has been designed, and it's given a lot of those stakeholders comfort. One really interesting comment that was made, and this was from the head of the Financial Intelligence Unit in Nauru, who was attending a regional meeting between all of the Financial Intelligence Unit heads, and the topic of citizenship by investment came up because a number of countries were maybe considering it or had programs, and they specifically pointed to Nauru and said, this is a country, or this is a way that it should be run. Unfortunately, I don't have that in writing. This is just an anecdotal comment. I would love that. But, it has been noticed, I think, in terms of the way the program has been designed.
Amazing. That's wonderful. And kind of with that, what makes the operations different, or what makes the program itself different? What we've seen from our side is processing is very centralized. So usually you would see local agents who are responsible for processing the files to the Citizenship Intelligence Unit. It's very different with Nauru. Everything kind of goes through the program. What was the reasoning behind it? Is that what makes it different? Are there other elements?
I think there are a few elements that make us different, but certainly in the way we operate compared to the Caribbean, at least, we don't have this concept of a local agent, as you say, to review the documents. We do all of that in-house. This is really just cutting out a middleman in the process that increases cost to the investor or to the applicant, potentially introduces another layer of complexity. So that was part of that work when we designed the program, looking across at the Caribbean, what's working well, what isn't, and deciding that this is probably a better way to do it, more efficient. It also means, we deal directly with the agents, such as Vancis Capital, rather than going through another intermediary. And that was really important to me because I like building the relationships. I want to make sure that we're in a partnership. And so having those strong relationships is really important. And it means we're a lot more hands-on throughout the application process and making sure that we can run things efficiently, making sure that we are maintaining things at a professional level without an extra intermediary. It means, we can be responsive, and the agents that are actually submitting the application are, kept informed by the program office itself rather than an intermediary in terms of how that application is actually progressing. So I think there are a lot of benefits with this particular component. There are other elements where I think we differ, and that's, ranging from policy, which we can talk about. Where do you want to go?
Yeah, but let's stick with processing for a little bit, because I am really what our team kind of reflects on a lot is the efficiency of the communication and how amazing it is. I mean, I was part of that call very briefly earlier this week where our team got to speak directly to you about a client and how to progress and how to kind of navigate the situation that you spoke about, and it's really wonderful to have that direct line of communication, because it builds not only confidence with the client, but it also builds confidence with the agent, of course, with Vancis Capital, because our team knows exactly where the program stands, since you are the program essentially. So how does that work from a staffing level? Most of your kind of team is based in New Zealand, I understand, and then you have representation in Nauru, in Dubai, and in Hong Kong. Do you, compared to other programs, or just from your experience, do you feel that the headcount had to increase a lot in order to maintain this level of efficiency? Are you running on a pretty lean team? How is all of this kind of coming together in terms of efficient processing?
So, firstly, I'll talk about why are we in New Zealand and not Nauru itself. And, we are effectively a third party. We're not officially part of the government, but we're contracted by the government to run the program on their behalf. So that gave us a bit of flexibility in terms of how we operate, meaning we don't need to be on the island itself. And the reason that we are based in New Zealand in particular is, we are able to source the talented individuals that we need to be able to run the program efficiently. I came from a banking background. A number of the team here also come from a similar banking background, just as an example. So they have that level of training and standards. So it means that we're able to find high quality professionals to actually run this program well. So I think that's something that in a way sets us apart from a lot of other programs as well. We are in New Zealand because it is still close to the Pacific and proximate, and we're in the same time zone, so that makes it that's obviously very important, but it also means, we're able to get high quality individuals actually sitting behind the desks doing the processing and doing the compliance side. In terms of staffing levels, I think we operate a relatively lean team. We are resourced to handle at the moment more volume than we are currently getting. So, we're ready and built to grow, and we've had the same base effectively from the start. So we do have a bit of fat in terms of resourcing, but at the same time, we are able to easily expand our resources if we need to, if, for example, volume is increasing. And it's something that we're monitoring very closely if we start to see bottlenecks in the application process. So it's not so easy for me to compare to other programs are we particularly lean, but we do like to operate efficiently. We are always looking at ways that we can simplify without compromising on, quality. We're looking at policy and ways that we can make things easier. So we do look a lot of ways at how we can make the process as efficient as possible for us. And to give you one example of that was initially when we launched the program, we required people to also send the physical documents as well as the scanned copies when they submit an application. So the application forms and all of the supporting documents. There's a cost to the agent or the applicant in terms of submitting that. And then there's additional, resource to actually look at the physical documents versus the electronic ones. And when we were looking at this process, we realized actually we have a very strong due diligence capability, which is outsourced to a part that actually goes and verifies the legitimacy of these documents. They are doing the work on the scanned copy anyway. So we've gone and independently verified the legitimacy of these documents anyway. So what additional benefit is there from receiving a physical document? So it's always looking at these processes, making sure that they actually make sense. And by doing that, we've saved cost for the applicant. We've, freed up a whole load of resources that could be better spent elsewhere, just as one of examples of many where we've tried to streamline the way that we work.
Yeah, and it's a great example to show how much has changed already within even the first year and a half of the program. And it's amazing to see that changes have happened already because you are noticing these things and you have a clear focus on that. The one question that I'm really interested in, programs that are new to the market and that have a generally quite a fast turnaround usually make some kind of a trade-off somewhere. That can be in the speed and the scrutiny or the volume of applications that they can accept. Do you feel like there has been a trade-off that the program office had to make or is making? And where does the discipline come from to actually commit to the timelines that that you are advertising, so to speak, for the program and for the processing of the applications?
Well, I don't think it's just advertising. I think these are timeframes that are actually lived, and I know the application that we recently processed for Vancis was approved in somewhere between 2 to 3 months. Not only that, but we have a relatively, actually I would say very efficient passport issuance process as well. So it's not just getting the approval, it's actually for the applicant to get the document in hand. We are very disciplined. We have meetings every day just about to talk through the application pipeline, to try and address any bottlenecks in each application, and we'll review every single application very quickly. We might have just a 30-minute stand up with the leadership team to go through, where is the application at? Is it stuck? What can we do to move it along? So trying to identify any bottlenecks in the application process. It also comes down to a couple of things to make sure that it can actually work very well, and starting from the agent. And one of the things that we're focused on at the moment is actually which are our agents that are performing really well, in terms of submitting good quality applications, really understand the requirements for us, and can then provide really good quality advice to applicants. And we've made a strategic decision to actually consolidate the number of agents that we work with, to focus on those that really understand what we want to do. That saves a lot of time up front, and saves a lot of time later on. It potentially saves a lot of time later on down the track, to avoid complexities or needing additional documentation. So that's the first thing. Make sure you choose a good quality agent. And partner for us, partnering with those agents and finding that right group that are licensed is important. We've made some mistakes. And so that's the first thing. And that makes sure when you submit an application, everything is complete. There's no back and forth with the agent, who then has to go back to the person applying to get additional documents, which I think looks bad on us, not the agent, because the agent will just say, oh, these guys are asking for more than what's actually required. And I know from the first application that you guys submitted to us a while ago, that was submitted really cleanly. And we were able to move forward really quickly with initial due diligence checks, and then get that compliance part underway. That makes a huge difference in the actual application process from the outset. The other thing is we do partner with a number of external due diligence providers who have staff on the ground in various countries. They go and do background checks. That process takes around 3 to 4 weeks to complete, and then there's an interview process. So again, a lot of the efficiencies in making sure that it can go smoothly are making sure that the interview is scheduled shortly after that part is completed. Don't delay it by 2-3 weeks. That's just going to delay the application timeframe. We work very closely with stakeholders in government to make sure that they are doing their part, and we have a commitment from the government. There are various, touch points within the government that need to, complete their responsibilities as well. And it can be a simple thing such as an office secretary actually making sure that they submit the application to the minister when it goes to cabinet to approval. So just staying on top of all of these things, having oversight of the program is actually really important, because things can, go missing, or not missing, but get missed. So we have a very active engagement with those key stakeholders. We have staff within the government, or have authority within the government, that are able to follow up on those applications within the government department. So all of these things combined help make sure that we have an efficient process. Yeah, I know this is a long-winded answer to your question. Have I actually compromised on much? No. Can I do it much faster? Not really, unless I compromise on things. There may be a point where volumes increase substantially, but everything is scalable. We are a private company. We are not stuck to government budgets, where we can resource up quite quickly. And we also have a commitment from the government to make sure that they are fully resourced so it won't cause any delays, because they understand the importance of this program to their economic security as well.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. I mean, there's so many things to pick up on. One is just in terms of the application that Vancis Capital submitted. That's one of the things that we pride ourselves on, and the processing team especially, is that we are working with high quality applicants and with understanding the documentation process and requirements of the program, so that everything is essentially done before it's submitted to any office, so that the process that comes afterwards, because clearly, as you were describing, it's a lot of moving pieces, it can run as efficiently and as quickly as possible. You talked about the process, so one of the things that's also coming up in the chat is what happens if something doesn't go very smoothly? What happens if there's a problem with an application, a difficult pathway? Could be a payment issue once they have to make their contribution, or something that occurs in due diligence. What's happening behind the scenes there?
Well, it does happen. It does happen a lot. Payment issues are challenging because they're outside of our control. So sometimes we have payments that are held up in intermediary banks. It hasn't come to our bank yet, so there's nothing that they can do to help the process move along. We do try and investigate as much as we can and provide as much information as possible, but that is a big challenge. Often we would require someone to actually engage with their bank who made the payment to help investigate and figure out why that is stuck. We have a very good relationship with our bank. We haven't had too many issues with them in terms of receiving payment. Most of the time it's just things are getting delayed along the payment pathway. Given that the payment's in US dollars, it needs to go through US intermediary banks, and sometimes they have questions. And for example, if you're an individual with a common name, and they're doing their screening, sometimes there might be a lot of hits that need to be discounted, and they might not have all the information they need. So it's those kind of things that can come up. Now, the other part of this question is, what if there are issues identified during the due diligence process? That will depend on what the issue is, and what. It will really depend on what the issue is and what information we have. So, if there are risks that we've identified, often we will go back to the agent and we might ask for more information from the applicant. We do try and address a lot of the any issues or concerns in the actual interview. So our interview may feel a bit more rigorous, but actually there's a reason behind that, is because it's actually trying to address any concerns, which will make sure that the next part of the application goes smoothly. There are occasions where applications are rejected. I think our approval rate is around 92% from memory at the moment. So there have been a few rejections, but most of those are relating to, kind of criminal activity or things that are obvious, and maybe it's just people trying their luck. Again, work with a good quality agent. They know what typically works. If the clients are good, then fine. We do generally have a pragmatic approach. We do understand that everyone has unique circumstances, and we do understand that, not a one-size-fits-all approach can apply. So we'll always look at the risks. We'll always try and understand the applicant's circumstances, and also working with the government in terms of what's appropriate from their risk appetite. But certainly we've approved applications for individuals with some issues, or some complexities, but and we always try and solve problems if we can, provided it's within the appetite. So we are quite flexible, we are quite pragmatic, but of course there are some risks that are not acceptable.
Yeah. And one of the questions in the chat, if the application is initially rejected, can it be resubmitted? Based on our experience, and you can tell me if I'm wrong there, or if it's working differently with the program. Ideally, it wouldn't even come to the rejection stage. You would know if a file runs into issues beforehand, because there is this open line of communication, and then you're communicating with the agent. The agent communicates with the client, Vancis Capital in this case, with our clients, who then speaks about, this is a finding, here is how it can be mitigated, or sometimes we would recommend as an agent not to continue to proceed because we know that this is not going to work out. So ideally it wouldn't even get to the.
Yes, but I will give you a practical example. So for example, you had an applicant that was under investigation for something. And they submitted an application at that time. Now, that may not be something that you decide is acceptable from an agent's perspective, but from a program office perspective, if we were reviewing that, depending on the nature of the investigation, we might decide that we're not comfortable with approving that because we don't know what the outcome is. If at a later stage then that investigation was concluded and there were no criminal charges laid, then certainly, you can resubmit an application. So from a practical standpoint, and that would be an example actually that we've seen, you can resubmit an application if it is initially rejected, and that would be a very practical example of why something might get rejected and then would be approved later on.
Well, thank you so much for that example. I'll move us to a different point, probably something that you're excited about, which is talking a bit more about policy and about eligibility expansion, because one of the things that we find a lot is Nauru is one of the most inclusive programs that is currently available. What was the thinking behind that? So, for example, just to make the inclusivity clear, there's you can include your spouse, partner, children, parents, and siblings, and then also I think you're working with sometimes with stateless people as well to give them opportunities to invest into a Nauru citizenship. So, what is the reasoning behind that? Is it a practical response to a gap in the market? Is it a policy position about who deserves access?
There are a couple of factors in this decision. So the main thing is actually it was culturally driven. Nauru is a very family-orientated island, and when we were reviewing our policies after the first year of operation, we looked at the family inclusion policies and we realized actually there are probably families that are applying that aren't able to include their family members. And, when you are becoming a citizen of a country, generally you're able to include all of your family. I think some other programs, for example, just talking about children, they put age restrictions on the children. Like for us, when we were looking at this, it's like, well, how do we determine what an appropriate age is and what difference does it actually make? If someone is 29 or 33, they're still part of the family. And so why would we restrict them? I think maybe some other programs think, well, if they're in employment or they're old enough, they can make their own application. But, look, if you want to apply as a family, bring the whole family along. It should be a family decision, and it shouldn't be something that it results in one family member being excluded and the rest being able to apply. So that was something that was really important from a cultural perspective, and also just it made sense to us. And what we also realized is no one else in the market is treating families like this. So for us, it was a point of difference. I think a lot of these policies, I can understand why they were put in place, but I really just don't think it makes sense. Similarly, you can allow, say, a child to apply, but they can't apply if they're married, or they can't apply if they're over a certain age, or they can't apply in employment. So we don't have any of those restrictions. We also allow siblings to apply, so you can include your brother or sister in the application as well. And again, originally we had restrictions in place around if that sibling was married, then they couldn't apply. We got rid of all of that. So it's like, you can bring your family along regardless of what the circumstances are. We don't want people to be left out, really.
That's amazing. And it makes the work of an agent in many ways also easier for us, especially because we know that there's a program that's so inclusive, and it's a great program to be recommending and advising clients if family is really at the heart of their goals. I'm just going to make an administrative note here. So Wella, who is our executive operations manager, she's going in the chat and she's answering some of the questions there that are related to processing. So you can just, if you have questions, check that out there. Edward, what I'm really curious about, to come back to our conversation, is you said that from a policy conversation, the inclusivity was rooted in the country's culture. Are there other policies or decisions that the program has made since this first year of operations that are also rooted in the country or the culture?
That's been the most standout. I think if you look at the policy changes that we've made, other than, since we started, other than the family inclusion piece, we've looked at the pricing. That's not culturally driven. But it was something that was really important because I think we got the pricing wrong when we first launched. We made it much simpler now. We looked at the restricted countries, and one of the big changes there was allowing applications from Russia and from Belarus, but on a restricted basis, whereas when we first launched the program, it was prohibited entirely. So we've created a bit more flexibility there. One of the earliest policy decisions that we made, which I will absolutely back as being the right decision, was around stateless. And you mentioned that earlier because that is not something that all programs accept. And what we realized was actually the risk is always on the individual applying, and we have really robust, due diligence and investigation capability to understand the background of an individual. So whether they're stateless or not doesn't actually inhibit our ability to identify someone and do any background checks on someone. Actually, they still have identification that enables us to do that. It's more just that perception that something is maybe bad around that individual or done something wrong to be in this situation, but that's actually not the case. So more of the work around that is trying to address that misconception. But for people in that situation, I'm sure it's helpful. So that was one of the key things. But other than those, the electronic filing, just to make things more simple. Really, the family inclusion is the only one that's been rooted in local culture and being mindful.
Yeah, great. And there's, speaking of local culture, so I want to move us on to maybe a different part of the conversation, which is what difference is this program actually making on the island in Nauru? It was obviously funds the Higher Grounds Initiative to relocate most of Nauru's population to a higher ground because the island is affected by climate change and rising sea levels. So what has this funding gone towards so far? How does it connect to the broader 50-year plan of the country?
The easy and simple answer to that question is the funding has gone nowhere at the moment. It's actually sitting entirely ring-fenced until we meet certain thresholds, and then certain decisions will be made around how that is allocated. So it's a very simple answer. It's sitting in a separate bank account at the moment, waiting to be applied. But we're very close to meeting those thresholds, in which case then we'll start to have conversations around how we're going to start to deploy that capital.
How, obviously you don't disclose the threshold, but how has that been set? Why has the decision been made to institute a threshold on that?
So I think it was just taking a conservative approach from the government in terms of how popular or viable the program will be before they made any core commitments around how that is going to be spent. You launch a program, you don't know what funds you're actually going to have available. So how can you make concrete investment decisions around funds you don't know are going to actually be there? So it's around seeing, what is the uptake like? How much capital or how much investment is this actually going to generate for the country on a per annum basis? And then we can make some really smart decisions around how that capital is going to be deployed. So that's why, and I think that makes sense. And as the program continues to grow, what we're putting in place is having, set projects or certain areas where that funding can actually be invested. So that will give people confidence that it's actually being used for the right reason. So we've got that framework in place, which will make sure that those funds are invested in the right projects. We will also then be able to report on how those funds are invested at a later stage once we've made those decisions.
Amazing. And it's in a way, it's a KPI, a very clear KPI for your office to reach that threshold so that the funds can be deployed.
Exactly.
Great. And so that's takes us to where the program is going in a way. Obviously, meet the threshold so the funds can be deployed. That is a clear goal. We've seen with programs in the Caribbean, for example, Vanuatu, the same, they've started to introduce biometric collection. Is that something that the program is considering or that's coming down the line?
So some of you will have noticed actually Nauru recently changed its name from Nauru. And this was a return to its indigenous name. And it's actually a name that's been used consistently by the locals. Now, what this is actually leading to is we are going to have to get a new stock of passports issued. And we will be introducing a chip passport. At the moment, it's not chipped. So we are having that conversation at the moment is if we introduce a chip passport, are we going to collect biometrics or not? And if so, what biometrics will be used? And so this is something that we're discussing at the moment, but it's still at early stages. We may be able to collect some, biometric information remotely, things that we're exploring. So we don't yet know what this process is going to look like. We don't yet know what, if anything, will be collected. So watch this space. But we'll be sure to keep everyone updated and also, I think, engaged in that conversation as we explore that, because I think it's a conversation that makes sense to have the agents involved in because that's a voice from the applicants in the market as well. So that's something that we'll do in due course. So we are transitioning to chip passports. We do then have the capability to capture biometrics. I am very mindful that, what we're seeing in Vanuatu, in St. Kitts, it does add a lot of complexity for people applying. And so if we are going to introduce biometrics, I would want to do it in a way that did not create too much burden on the person applying for the passport. The other thing I think is when we do move to those chip passports, my preference would be to make it optional for people to make the change immediately or wait until their passport expires rather than a forced change, or forced collection of biometrics, as an example, within a short period of time. I don't see the need to do that at the moment. Just the transition to chip passports alone is important enough because we're one of the few countries that still haven't made that transition. So it's exciting times ahead, at least, but we'll make sure that we keep everyone updated with that as it progresses.
It goes under the I'm hearing like the larger umbrella that from you about the Nauru program really is optimize and efficient and streamlined, which is great. It's a really nice thread and through line. Have there been any conversations with other governments about expanding visa-free access for Nauruan citizens? We know you have access to the UK. You're in conversation with many other countries. So what are these bilateral negotiations looking like?
So there are a lot of conversations underway. Bilateral negotiations are sometimes slow. And getting that engagement and finding the right, contact in those countries to actually take this initiative forward can be challenging. But there are conversations or some engagement with around 31 different countries at the moment is our list. I would say 2 or 3 of those are really viable and likely to move within the next few months. So looking forward to updates on that. And the rest are more soft, and we'll progress that as best we can. But yes, there are certainly active conversations out there that are being had by the government with other governments around increasing that visa-free access, because we want to improve the value and mobility that this passport provides to applicants. And there are some interesting countries in that mix as well, which I think will really make it quite attractive.
Last thing about where the program is going, what do you expect to be different or hope to be different about this program 2 to 3 years from now?
So there are a few things that we are exploring at the moment, and I'd like to see implemented within the next 2 to 3 years. And again, this is around streamlining things, continuing to make it efficient, but also keeping abreast of technology advancements and how this can benefit the applicants or make it easier for the applicants. So we are looking at the moment in terms of accepting cryptocurrency as a payment method or payment channel, and that's something that we're currently exploring with the board and with the government in terms of their appetite. We are also looking at technology such as just simple translation tools, but some of them are not that great. But the reason we're looking at specifically translation tools is if we get the right software or it develops enough, there's no need for applicants to go and get all their documents translated from, say, Arabic or Mandarin into English. We would be in a position where we can accept the original documents and then rely on that translation. And that's a huge cost save in terms of, the translation services, but also just saving time in terms of getting all the documents ready as well. So that's something that I'd like to see implemented, and we're exploring with a couple of technology providers around that at the moment. There are a few other streamlining initiatives that we'd like to implement as well, or just create optionality. Then probably the other big one is, do we open it up to other investment channels? So for example, in the Caribbean, you've got real estate, or do you put things in place that are around specific projects, funding around specific projects? Or are there other things that we could do? For example, one thing that we've thought about would be doing a zero interest bond that is maybe linked to US Treasuries as an example. And the idea behind this would be actually say someone would put up more capital up front, just for theory's sake, say it's 500,000, and over a 2-year period, we hold that, the interest gets paid to the Nauru government, and then maybe at the end, the applicant takes a haircut. Maybe it's, the interest that's gone to the Nauru government plus I don't know, 30, 40K, then at least the applicant gets their capital back and it's an application done at a lower cost, but with no compromise to the Nauru government in terms of the funds they receive. So these are the kind of things that we're thinking about. We're always looking to innovate and do things differently. So I'm happy to hear your ideas if you have any suggestions, and we're always looking to work with our agents on how we can improve and what we can do differently. So who knows, in 2 to 3 years' time, there'll probably be a few other initiatives that we have up our sleeves that get implemented as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure that our COO, Sandeep, and Dwayne, our CEO, will have lots of ideas that they're happy to share. Looking a bit ahead towards long-term planning for our clients. So Nauru is very open and candid about the existential undertaking that is behind the program, and that the country has to go through. So for applicants who are thinking about this citizenship as long-term across multiple generations, what does that continuity of the citizenship actually rest on if the geography of the country is changing over the coming decades?
Let me set the record straight on this one. The island is not going to disappear. The challenge is 90% of the residents on the island live at sea level. The reason that it's called the Higher Ground Initiative is they have high ground is about 50 to 100 meters above sea level. You actually need to relocate the residents from sea level, which is more the existential part, to the part that is not existential. So that's the idea behind it. So the island is not going to disappear. It's more with rising sea levels over time. A lot of the existing residents are going to potentially be at risk. So it's about addressing that problem. And yes, it is a small country. They do have a lot of vulnerabilities. Hopefully, with the success of this program and with other initiatives that the Nauru government is launching, we're able to raise enough funds that will actually help, mitigate that risk from climate change, and also just strengthen the economic infrastructure as well that is needed for them to continue to survive and thrive.
Amazing. Thank you, and I appreciate you setting the record straight. I will pull in one question from our chat here. If anyone has any other, please drop them in there. So Richard is asking, Edward, given your New Zealand background, do you see any potential complementary between the Nauru Citizenship Program and the New Zealand Investor Plus program? So effectively combining Pacific citizenship with New Zealand residence and investment. Could that ever warrant a government to government conversation?
I think it's a really interesting concept, and I do know, and I am aware of applicants that have applied for Nauru also applying for a residency either in Europe or in other countries. So I am aware that people do often package their things together. They are very complementary. I would love to have a conversation with the New Zealand government. I am or do have a relationship with certain people within Invest New Zealand. Whether we can actually, the New Zealand government operates, how would I say this? You have to go through proper process for something like this, and there really has to be a strong demand. So it wouldn't be something that would be easy to implement, at least from my perspective, but we could certainly have the conversation to see if there's something that can be done complementary. New Zealand government does have a strong role to play in the Pacific in terms of, supporting Pacific countries, and given the funding is going towards climate change, potentially there is something complementary there. So yes, I love your idea. I'll have a think about it and see whether I can to move something forward.
So Richard, watch the space, essentially.
Well, yeah. Don't get your hopes up, because I know it'll be a challenging conversation. But
it's processes are processes, yeah. Then I'll close it out with one last question. So just to note, because this was a question in the chat. Yes, there is a reduced contribution for the Nauru program at the moment that is running until December 31st of this year, and that's a $25,000 contribution. Yeah. So if whoever's listening, if you want to make use of that, please get in touch with us, and we'd be happy to tell you more about that and see if you're eligible for the program. Edward, the last question for today, and thank you so much for being with us for this long, is if you had one thing that you wish more advisory firms and agents understood about working with a government program like the Nauru program, what would that be?
The thing that I see across the industry and working with our agents is, they're very much focused on supporting the applicant, and I completely get that. You're there to advise the applicant and support them. I really wish people also thought more about the country that they're actually working with and applying to, and their needs as well. Now, this is not specific to Vancis Capital. I would say more relative to other agents that we work with is really just thinking about the country's needs and the people that they're putting forward for applications. So I think that it is just really being mindful of the country and what they're trying to achieve.
And I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you so much. Edward, thank you very much for your time and for all of these answers and insights into the program. I really appreciate it. If anyone who is listening and will listen to this later on, if you have any questions, please do feel free to get in touch with us. If you have any questions for Edward specifically, you can get in touch with us, and we're happy to get in touch with Edward and field those questions. As you heard, our company is in touch with his office quite a lot with the clients that we have with the Nauru program office. So there should be no issue in getting you the answers that you'd like. Edward, thank you very much. I hope you have a good rest of your evening, and
Thank you.
Thank you.